Unexplained missing person cases fascinate us because the ways in which people disappear seem impossible. A normal day can become a nightmare in an instant when a loved one disappears just around a corner, or an apartment is abandoned with no sign of a struggle. Sometimes investigators learn new information that makes these cases even more bewildering without getting any closer to solving them. Number 5. 29-year-old Amanda Lynn Schumann-Deza was last seen sometime in the early 1990s outside of a Napa, California apartment complex. Deza was a mother to 3 young children, a beloved daughter, and had recently separated from her husband. Outside of the apartment building, she was seen standing with a strange man who she'd met at a rehabilitation facility. Then she vanished. Her family didn't file a missing person report. Law enforcement would later claim that people did look for her, but nobody got far. In March of 1995, in the city of Holt, California, 2 scavengers pulled an old refrigerator out of a drainage ditch. What they found inside would horrify them and haunt detectives for decades to come. Inside the refrigerator was the body of a woman, wrapped in a sleeping bag. The woman had no identifying documents, but was in possession of a diamond ring and other jewelry. Forensic experts determined that she'd been there for at least 6 months, and that she had suffered blunt force trauma injuries. John Huber, an investigator working on homicide cases at the time, was initially optimistic that he would be able to identify the woman. He tracked down the serial number of the refrigerator, but it hit a dead end when he found nobody had turned in the warranty on it. In the freezer, he found 5 small cartons of Crystal brand milk, which he discovered were only distributed in Northern California schools and jails. He also found a bag of ice in the freezer, which also was only distributed in Northern California. The woman had excellent dental health, but Huber found no match. After canvassing every institution that carried Crystal milk cartons, every store that carried the brand of ice he found in the freezer, and asking every dentist in the area, Huber had made no progress identifying the woman who came to be known as the lady in the fridge. He worked the case all the way to his retirement in 2013. In 2023, everything changed. Using new DNA analysis technology, the cold case team finally identified the lady in the fridge. It was Amanda Lynn Schumann-Deza, who had gone missing all those years ago. While Deza's family and officers who worked on the case gained some closure by identifying the mysterious woman, the question of how she got there remains. The sheriff's office is still determined to bring the culprit to justice. Number 4. Charlotte Moriarty was known as a free spirit who could disappear on an adventure for weeks at a time. That's why her boyfriend, Mark Barnes, wasn't disturbed when she disappeared with their 6-month-old son, Marx Panama, one day in 1977. The family lived in Hawaii, and Moriarty took Marx out with her while she went shopping. It wasn't until 3 weeks later that Barnes became worried and called the police. Barnes spent years distraught over the loss of his son, until he received a phone call from a man named Steve Carter in 2012. Carter, who had a happy and affluent childhood in New Jersey, was the adopted son of an army officer and had always had suspicions about his childhood. Specifically, he didn't understand why his birth certificate was made a year into his life. When he heard about the case of Carlina White, who discovered that she'd been kidnapped out of a hospital as a baby, Carter began looking into his own childhood, and what he found chilled him. While researching missing children, Carter discovered an image of what the missing child Marx Panama would look like aged to an adult, and it looked just like him. A DNA test later confirmed that he was, in fact, the missing child. Carter discovered that the day of his disappearance, he and Moriarty were found in the home of another local woman who called the police. Moriarty seemed confused about who she was and the identity of her son, and she was placed in psychiatric care before escaping and leaving Carter to become a ward of the state. This is how he was adopted by his new family in New Jersey. Moriarty, however, had a daughter named Jennifer Monheimer by another man. Monheimer never gave up the search for her mother and half-brother, and it was her efforts that led to the creation of the adult Marx Panama sketch. Charlotte Moriarty remains missing to this day. Number 3. On July 8, 2006, Elizabeth Harris was looking forward to a family shopping trip with her 18-year-old daughter, Roxanne Paltov. Harris and Paltov had an especially close relationship and spoke on the phone multiple times a day. Both women's lives were upended when Paltov failed to show up for the shopping trip and was never seen again. Tension had been brewing in the family as Paltov had become involved with a strange character. Her boyfriend, 30-year-old Lewis Walls, was a troublemaker with a criminal record who claimed to be associated with the Bloods, a notorious street gang. Harris didn't like Walls, and Walls' family didn't like Paltov, so the star-crossed couple could only meet at motels. They would spend days together at a time in various motel rooms around an area of Austin known for criminal activity. The day that Paltov missed the shopping trip that she'd planned with her mother, Harris received a distressed call from Walls. He claimed that he'd not seen or heard from Paltov since 8:30 the prior night. According to Walls, the couple argued over issues from their past, and Paltov stormed off into the night. Walls said that he ran after her, but Paltov told him to leave her alone. He claims that he then went back to their motel room for 20 minutes to calm down, but when he went back out to find his girlfriend, she was nowhere to be found and never seen again. At first, police saw this as a typical lover's quarrel and didn't expect foul play. Overburdened with cases, the investigators at the Austin Police Department overlooked some vital details early on. In the immediate aftermath of the disappearance, things got incredibly strange. Walls cleared out of the motel room before filing a police report and took all of Paltov's belongings with him. Because of this, police were not able to properly search for clues. Walls then held Paltov's cell phone for the next week and made a bewildering 300 calls to various hotels, friends, and singles chat lines, using the phone for hours and hours before returning it to Harris. One of the possessions Paltov supposedly left in the motel room with Walls was her purse, which her family swears she would never go anywhere without. She also left behind jewelry that friends and family say she always kept on. People who knew Paltov also think that if she stormed off in anger, she would have taken her phone to call her mother. In another strange detail, 6 days after Paltov disappeared, a man named Jeffrey Moore got into a violent altercation at a hotel near the place where Walls and Paltov had been staying. When a security guard broke up the fight, he found Paltov's license in Moore's wallet. Even after questioning him, police were still unsure how Moore came into possession of the ID. Even though Walls later threatened another girlfriend and reportedly told her that he had been responsible for Paltov's disappearance, investigators were unable to find any evidence, new leads, or usable confessions. Then, in 2019, Paltov's younger sister found something odd in her cell phone records. She found that between 6:44 p.m. and 8:42 p.m. on July 7, 2006, the hours just before Paltov disappeared, her phone made 12 calls that appeared to have been roaming charges. This means perplexingly that the phone was making calls outside of its service area just before Walls flooded the phone records with hundreds of random dials. Anyone with information about this case is encouraged to call the Austin Police Department's Missing Person Unit at 512-974-5250. Number 2. In 1985, a strange young man named Christopher Chichester was staying in the Los Angeles home of an elderly woman named Dee Dee Sohas. Dee Dee was quiet and kept to herself, and Christopher was an enigma. He was German, studying to become an actor, would sometimes use the fake middle name of Mountbatten, and hand out fake business cards that claimed he was a baronet. While Christopher didn't have much money of his own, he was fond of the finer things in life and would even use Dee Dee's money to buy expensive clothing for himself. All of this changed when Dee Dee's son, John, and his wife, Linda, moved in. John quickly became suspicious of Christopher and began inquiring about his background. Shortly after, John and Linda left town, and Christopher told Dee Dee that they'd urgently been called away on business. One of Christopher's friends noticed a patch of freshly disturbed dirt in the backyard, but he brushed it off with an excuse about plumbing. Then Christopher disappeared too. Decades later, the full story would be revealed. The baronet Christopher Mountbatten Chichester did not exist. The young man's real name was Christopher Hans Gerhardsreiter, and he was a lifelong fraud and criminal. Christian grew up in Germany and then came to America as a 17-year-old. On his way into the country, he lied to immigration services and told them that an American family would sponsor him as an exchange student. While he did finally find a family in Connecticut that was willing to house him, they later kicked him out because he believed himself to be too good to do any chores. Christian then traveled back and forth across the country, using a variety of made-up names and identities, and constantly faking his way into the American upper class. Shortly after the disappearance of John and Linda Sohas, Christian was found back in Connecticut using the alias of Christopher Crow and attempting to sell John's car. He briefly convinced a brokerage firm to hire him as an executive, only to be fired when they discovered that he'd given them an incorrect social security number. The number he used on his application belonged to the infamous serial killer, Son of Sam. Years later, Christian would assume the name of Clark Rockefeller and pretend to be a minor heir to the Rockefeller fortune. He married a businesswoman named Sandra Boss and was also able to keep up the ruse for years before she became suspicious of him and hired a private investigator to uncover his true identity. A construction crew in Los Angeles was breaking ground in Dee Dee Sohas' backyard when they made a chilling discovery. They found the remains of John Sohas, who had not been seen since 1985. While police were looking for Christopher Crow, Clark Rockefeller had lavishly been spending his wife's money on fine art on the other side of the country. Sandra Boss filed for divorce, and Christian, in an attempt to keep the court from investigating him, agreed to only 3 annual visits with his daughter. However, he couldn't stand to be apart from her and eventually kidnapped her before running away to Baltimore and assuming the identity of a sea captain named Chip Smith. FBI agents were able to track him down and lure him out of his apartment by telling him that his ship was sinking in the marina. While in prison for the kidnapping, prosecutors convicted Christian of the murder of John Sohas. The location of Linda, however, remains a mystery. Number 1. In August of 1912 in Louisiana, Leslie Dunbar and her family took a trip to Swayze Lake, Louisiana, where she lost her 4-year-old son, Bobby. Bobby had a distinctive mole and a scar on his foot, and the wealthy Dunbar family searched feverishly for him. After an 8-month statewide search, officers found Bobby in the custody of William Cantwell Walters. Walters claimed that Bobby was actually a young boy named Bruce, who was the illegitimate son of his brother by a poor woman named Julia Anderson. Anderson, he said, had asked him to watch Bruce for her while she worked. However, Bruce had the same scar and mole that Bobby had. Even though locals corroborated Walter's story, he was arrested for kidnapping. Newspapers provided mixed accounts, some saying that the boy instantly recognized Leslie Dunbar as his mother, and others saying that the sight of the mother made him cry. The Dunbars went to court to fight for custody of their son and won. Julia Anderson lost custody of the boy, who she claimed to be Bruce, and Walters went to jail, writing in a letter, quote, "It seems that I must suffer now for an imaginary sin or crime that has never been committed." Decades later, he would be vindicated. The boy grew up as Bobby Dunbar and had children and grandchildren in the family. Then, in the early 2000s, his granddaughter, Margaret Dunbar Cutright, was disturbed by the conflicting newspaper accounts that surrounded the battle over his custody. Determined to find the truth of the matter, she had her DNA tested against the son of Bobby's brother. It wasn't a match, meaning the man who lived as Bobby Dunbar had been Bruce Anderson all along. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.